Hey guys, so this will be the first part of my walkthrough for History Channel Battle for the Pacific. This is the Xbox 360 PS3 version, which actually is an entirely different game from the Wii PS2 version. I'm going to be giving commentary and tips throughout this walkthrough. I will be playing this entire walkthrough on the hard difficulty, which to be honest isn't even really that hard. Overall, this is a pretty easy game. I like switching the M1 Garand for the Japanese Type 100. It's automatic and you get 30 shots. Like most other World War II games, you can't actually reload the M1 Garand unless the clip is empty, which can be pretty annoying sometimes. Also, keeping the Type 100 in slot 1 is a good idea, because it allows you to switch very quickly to your Thompson submachine gun if you run out of ammo. Switching weapons is much faster than reloading. Be mindful of the enemies on this hill. You can also simply just run by this area without shooting at the enemies, but where's the fun in that? I am playing a little bit more aggressively in this walkthrough because it's more exciting. To minimize your chances of dying though, I do recommend playing slightly more conservative than I am playing here. One thing you may not have noticed, there's actually a trench gun around the corner here if you walk past the soldier. I don't pick it up though simply because I don't think the trench gun is a very good weapon. You don't get very much ammo, you don't get very many rounds per clip, and the gun just isn't as strong as it should be for those drawbacks. There's actually a trench gun in all 3 trench missions in this game. It's a shame they didn't make it more powerful, because it would be a nice reward for finding a weapon that's semi-hidden. Throughout this walkthrough series, I'll also be giving historical tidbits here and there behind the history of each mission in real life. For example, the attack on Wake Island occurred right after the Japanese bombing of Pearl Harbor in December 1941. The battle eventually ended with the surrender of the American forces to the Japanese. Wake Island was held by the Japanese for the entirety of World War II until the Japanese surrender in 1945. One fact I found to be pretty interesting is that the Japanese garrison on Wake Island didn't actually surrender until the war was already over. You can take out a lot of enemies before they even come down into the trenches. This is useful because they usually don't even attack you until they come down. It's also pretty fun to shoot them down before they even make it into the trenches. So for this part of the mission, you'll have to take out a certain number of enemies with this machine gun. It can actually be annoyingly hard to get a hold of this weapon sometimes. You have to be lined up and pointed at a very specific spot. Overall though, I think this is a pretty fun part of the mission. There are 2 enemy spawn points here, both on the landing craft. Try to eliminate the enemies that are closest to you, as they represent your biggest threat. Your aiming reticle expands as you hold down the trigger longer, but this can actually be sometimes an advantage, as it increases the area in which you can hit an enemy with your bullets. You need to kill a certain number of enemies before you can move on to the next part of the mission. Once you see your mission objectives pop up, that means you can move on to the next part of the mission. Getting in some headshots feels so satisfying to take out 5 enemies with 1 clip. Taking these guys out before they can make it down. Really shooting up this guy's leg. Throwing a grenade here. Use your grenades wisely as they are limited for each mission. You can't replenish them until the end of the mission. Here you have to get back on the machine gun again and take out another wave of enemies coming up on the beach. It's pretty much the exact same thing as the first time around. If you are about to die and your screen gets really red, you can simply retreat to heal back up, as you heal pretty quickly in this game. Throwing a grenade can also be useful in this area if you see a lot of enemies nearby before you get on the machine gun. Took care of those enemies pretty easily. Now moving on to the next part of the mission where we have to get to the AA guns. These guys are just jumping into my line of fire. Good grenade area here. Funny how you can see the enemies just spawn right in front of you. That guy took a seat. Here's a good example of switching to my secondary weapon to take out these enemies faster compared to then if I reloaded. Always be sure to reload after skirmishes. For this part of the mission, you'll have to shoot down enemy planes with this AA gun. It's pretty simple, as all enemy planes can actually be located from this vantage point right here. You know you've successfully shot it down when smoke starts coming out of the plane. I think that's a bit lazy on the part of the developers, as I would have really liked to see the plane actually crash when you shoot it down, but it is what it is. This is definitely a budget game. I actually noticed the hitbox is actually slightly above the dot of the aiming reticle, so I tried to aim slightly below my intended target. I recommend aiming for the engines, propellers, and the body of the plane, as this will increase the chances you actually shoot it down. Once you see this guy show up, that means you can move on to the next part of the mission. Your AI teammates are actually pretty useful. Too useful in my opinion. You can often just retreat from an area and let your commanding officer clear out all the enemies. Your commanding officer is invincible after all. It's kind of unfortunate because it removes a lot of the challenge from a game that really isn't that challenging in the first place. Another thing that sucks about this game is the huge lack of variety in mission structure and objectives. As you can see, a lot of this level looks pretty bland with its repetitive trenches. What's even worse is that a couple of other levels later in this game, specifically the first Leyte Island mission and the first Iwo Jima mission, are pretty much copy and pasted versions of this one. They have the exact same repetitive trenches. One interesting tidbit to keep in mind is that your reload animation is actually slightly shorter if you still have ammo in your clip. Notice how your character actually reaches over to the other side of the gun to reload when your clip is empty. This doesn't happen if you still have ammo in your clip. It's probably not that important, but sometimes a split second can make a difference. Now coming up on the very last area of the mission. It's pretty obvious, but this is an excellent place to use a grenade. Pretty crazy blast with the ragdoll physics. And that's the end of part 1 of the walkthrough. This was actually probably the longest mission in the entire game. As you can see, the gameplay is pretty linear. Despite that, still hope you guys tune in for part 2. Until next time.